Hi, folks. You are very welcome to this week's Genos Live. And as any of you who have been on the session the last couple of weeks will know, we're particularly excited this week to have Richard Boyatzis. And we're going to bring him on in just a couple of minutes after a couple of announcements. So great to have you here. I see people are joining up. As ever, let me suggest that maybe you could tell us where you're dialing in from. Really curious to see where you're dialing in from. And while you're doing that in the chat, and Aoife will be looking at that, why don't you tell us what has happened this week that made you really feel good? So just pop something in that tells us what you really made you feel really good this week. Now, because Richard's in Boston, we're coming to you at 8:30 Boston time instead of the usual 8:30 GMT time. And we're just curious to see, we've seen a big blip in the numbers because of that timing. And wondering, put it into the chat, does this time suit you guys better? And just let us know, because this is a movable feast. We can go wherever we want. We're going to bring Aoife in a moment and she'll tell us what you're saying. So pop that into the chat for now. Let me do the obligatory 30-minute or 30-second advertisement. Don't worry, I'm not going to give you 30 minutes. My name is Derek McCann. I am the European Director for Genos International. We are around since the year 2000 in the field of emotional intelligence, and we're a publisher of emotional intelligence assessments, online and in-person training on resilience, psychological safety, emotional intelligence, and we also certify people as emotional intelligence practitioners. We've certified more than 10,000 people worldwide. We've about 7,500 active practitioners. And our program, which is for independent or in-house coaches, consultants, trainers, learning and development professionals, etc., is accredited for continuing education by the ICF. Final brag. For the last 5 years, something we're very proud of is that we have been, according to trainingindustry.com, one of the top 5 assessment companies in the world. And they tell us each year when they do the citation that the 2 reasons that we have been consistently in that top 20. One is the ongoing innovation in our products and our services. And secondly, the level of support that we give to our clients and the way that they speak about us. So that's the advert done. Before we get into this week's, as you know, we're doing a kind of a who's who of folks in the emotional intelligence, psychological safety, people development arena. Next week we have Mary Gregory, who is going to talk about her book, Ego, Get Over Yourself and Lead. If you haven't signed up for it yet, or if you're not on our reminder list, if you're really fast, you can grab your phone, get the camera, put it over that QR code, and it'll take you straight to the page to sign up. But don't worry, we'll give you a link to that later on. In fact, Aoife will publish into the chat in a while a link to the reminder list, so that you get reminded each week. As he's looking in the background, Richard will be looking at this, and he'll see half a dozen of his colleagues who are like him, very much at the top of their field in this area. Over the next several months, we have a real who's who of people from emotional intelligence, psychological safety, neuroscience, etc. So make sure you're on that reminder list. Now, let me bring in my co-host, Aoife, and just ask her really quickly before we bring Richard in, what are we getting in the chat? Where are people coming in from? And what's making them happy campers this week?
Hi, Derek. Thank you. Good to be back with you today. We're so excited to have Richard join us and really can't wait for Mary's session next week. I'm actually trying to keep up with the comments here because they're just flooding in so quickly. We have folks joining from Belgium, from Cyprus, from Spain, Switzerland, France, Miami, Hong Kong, Czech, Barcelona, Guatemala, Barcelona again, Italy. It's a little late for the few folks we have in Hong Kong. They're sharing it's 9:30 p.m. Not too late, but on the later side. A lot of feedback that this time is actually really good for a lot of people.
Good.
Some more from the UK, from London, from Trinidad and Tobago, from Greystones in Ireland. Good to have you, Noel. From Austria, South Africa. I mean, I think I could keep going, Derek, and we'd have most of the countries covered. You're very, very welcome with us, folks. I will just add early on here, please do, I know a lot of you have been diving into Richard's book and have a lot of questions, so please do send them to me in advance if possible today. But really, they're still just flooding in, Derek, all over the world.
Well, listen, we
Great
could
to
sit
have you
there
with
and
us.
listen to that all day long, but I guess what folks came here for was to see Richard and to hear Richard. So let's bring Richard in and welcome Richard. You're very, very welcome, and thank you, by the way, for putting the green Irish background up behind you just to recognise where we're broadcasting from.
I live to serve. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, it's a great pleasure. Aoife, would you like to do a kind of semi-formal introduction to Richard, and then we'll kick off?
Definitely, I would be honored to. Folks, for those of you, and I'm sure there's not many of you there that are not already familiar with Richard Boyatzis, he is a distinguished university professor and a professor in the departments of organizational behavior, psychology, and cognitive science at Case Western Reserve University and human resources at ESADE as well. Using his intentional change theory and complexity theory, which we are going to dive into today, he continues to research sustained desired change at all levels of human endeavor, from individuals, teams, organizations, communities, countries, and global change. He was ranked in the ninth most influential international thinkers by an 11,000 HR director survey in HR Magazine, and is the author of more than 150 articles on leadership, competencies, emotional intelligence, coaching, and management education. And today we are beyond honored to have him with us to dive a little deeper into his book, Helping People Change, that I know a lot of you have either just purchased or have read over and over again. So Richard, thank you so much for being with us. I am actually going to be representing the audience today. So I'm gonna hop off, be behind the scenes, and I'm going to be preparing all the wonderful questions and feedback that we have for you today.
Thank you, Aoife.
Thanks a million, Aoife. And just as you were saying that and you got to the end, I thought, is that all? You know, when you read out. So it's
there's actually quite, a lot more. There's a lot more.
Quite a list of accomplishments. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, Richard really
well,
is.
you did miss the 1.5 million people that have taken one of my MOOCs. And the only reason I say that is because after the second run of the first MOOC, I stopped counting the countries because I'd counted over 215 different countries.
Now, just for people who are not in the know, tell them what a MOOC is.
A MOOC is a massive open online course. It's asynchronous learning. I did the first one in 2013 on leadership through emotional intelligence. Then Ellen Van Osten, Melvin Smith, and I did another one in 2015 on coaching. And they're available. They used to be available for free entirely. Now I think they're for free for a week. But it's a collection of brief 10-minute videos, exercises, thought-provoking issues. And for me, I got into it because I think we have to desperately respond to people's desire to learn worldwide. And most of the 7 billion people alive on Earth today don't have access to universities or university libraries or the funds to go to those kinds of programs, or even the elite consultancies like Genos. So I wanted to be a part of us trying to get stuff out there for free. All somebody needs is an internet connection. And that's what the MOOCs have done. I do have to say, though, that the ultimate test for me was, and Aoife, you can check, did anybody sign in from Mali? That's one of the harder. Mali and Greenland were two of the harder countries to get people to sign on from.
We'll come back to you on that one.
We're going to need a few minutes, and I'll come back to you towards the end on that one.
Great. Listen, thank you for that, Richard. And by the way, we'll dig out. We've put together a resource page for the various things we're going to talk with Richard today, and we'll give you a link to that at the end, and we'll put up a link to these MOOCs on that as well. Thanks, Richard. I read recently, and I met Richard the other night so we could do a tech check, and I said to him, I believe that you've been talking about intentional change theory, which is very much at the heart of the latest book, since somewhere around the 70s. And he said, no, I haven't. It's actually been the 60s that we started talking about it. And I really not offended, but I put my foot in my mouth and I said, but there wasn't any corporate coaching then. And he gave me a good old slap around the chops for that one. That's a long time to be talking about a theory that's related to corporate coaching, isn't it, Richard?
Yes, yeah, and either it means I'm amazingly stubborn or persistence, if you believe Angela Duckworth's grit concept, or it's just a provocative, era-long question. And the question is, and as I said to you when you asked me, I was in the aerospace field. I was designing control systems for interplanetary vehicles, and I ran out of money at MIT. My parents had been immigrants, and I put myself through school. And what I discovered was when you're doing the work day to day, it's kind of boring. And this is 1966. So at that point, I decided to shift. And when I went back to MIT and took a course in management, this young professor, David Kolb, who many of you may know because of his work on experiential learning theory, introduced me to this field, and the field of psychology. And in the very first semester, so in the spring of 1967, we started analyzing data that he'd been collecting for 2 years at MIT on how people help or don't help each other. And we're looking at mostly 28 to 32-year-olds. And that grabbed me, because that was why I decided psychology might not just be bull, it might be something useful. Because I was a part of 2 research units at Northrop, NORAIR in Los Angeles. And, if you watch Big Bang Theory, it was a whole 2 departments of Sheldons. And it was a lot of brain power. And the managers were horrible. We're just horrible at getting something other than the minimum effort, which, by the way, I'm afraid is happening today.
Sure.
So this quest for how do you help people? How do you help? And then you say, help about what? Well, it's how do you help people learn and change? Because change is life. Without change, we die, literally, at the cellular level or at the national level. And so for us to keep adapting, we have to keep making choices. And those choices end up being ones that are either going to help you more or be dysfunctional. So if you're facing a midlife crisis, do you have an affair, or do you go to school and get a master's degree? They cost about the same, but one helps you in your life and the other leads to unending agony. So yes, it's been since spring of 67 that I've been working on this. And in fact, the first study that we were doing, we ended up publishing 2 papers on, and that was really the root of what now I call intentional change theory.
Yeah, and just folks, for those of you who are listening, and Richard, you'll be aware of this. I mean, every day, I don't know how many tens of thousands of books are published, but there are books published on coaching and change and so on and so forth on a very, very regular basis. There are not many that have 55 years of research, field research, and neuroscience research that we touch on behind them. So when you talk about, when you look at helping people change, folks, this is a book that has some real serious presence. Now, the intentional change theory, I'd say a lot of people in the coaching field, maybe not enough, but a lot of people in the coaching or management field probably use it, but haven't heard the name or haven't used the name. But essentially it's, and stop me if I get this wrong, essentially it's envisioning the ideal self, comparing that to the real or the current self, doing up an analysis to see, hey, what strengths can I leverage and what areas do I need to shore up, and then starting to experiment with new behavior. Is that about the size of it, Richard?
Well, that makes it sound A, very rational, and B, very mechanical. So what I'd say is, although you correctly identified parts of it, I don't think it captured. So let me just add to what you said, Derek.
Great.
First, I believe, and this is where complexity theory comes in very importantly, that you can't look at human change individually or in organizations or teams or anything without knowing that it's not linear and it's not continuous. That the change, I mean, anybody who's volume challenged and has tried to lose weight knows some days you lose a pound, some days you gain a pound, some days you lose 2 pounds, some days nothing happens. That's called nonlinear.
Yeah.
And as a part of my theory, and I've written about this, most human behavior, and certainly change, is distributed in what's called a power law, not a Gaussian or normal distribution. And that means that people make mistakes all the time.
Yeah.
Okay, so here's the first one. Yes, I believe that what drives sustained desired change is a really compelling, comprehensive personal vision, a dream, not goals. Goals actually go the opposite way. But the dream, which is the first discovery, wakes up and empowers the organism at all levels. And we have now the neuroimaging studies that we've done and a few of the hormonal studies of doctoral students of mine that I've supervised that make it very clear that when people dream about their sense of purpose, do they exist? Why are you doing all this? Not the how and not the what in terms of goals, but the why. It opens up parts of their body that actually increase their immune system, make them better functioning cognitively in terms of cognitive capacity and creativity, and makes them more open to new ideas and people. And when you set at the beginning of a process, and this is where a lot of coaches get a little weird, if you try to go for SMART goals or specific goals at the beginning of a change process, you literally close the person down. Research has shown, you move their peripheral vision from 180 degrees down to 30. You stop their ability to be open to another person because they're put in a defensive mode. So although there are 5 moments of emergence where something pops in my intentional change theory, and the first thing being the discontinuity aspect of it, the second thing being the power of the ideal self or the personal vision, or in teams or companies, the shared vision. The second key thing is the tipping point. What moves you from one to the other? And that's where I've created these 2 magnets, if you will, called a positive and negative emotional attractor. And we've shown hormonally, it captures the difference between renewal states and stress states, empathic neural networks or task-oriented analytic neural networks. And the difference is pronounced. Are you helping a person open up, or are you closing down? And all too often in our desire to be expedient or efficient or show that we've got performance relevance, we go to the measurable, the specific, let's focus on that problem right now. And if you start that way, there's nowhere else to go. So if you've incorrectly diagnosed and now you're treating a symptom, not the problem, you've lost the case. What's worse is we now have the data to show that when you start that way, the human organism goes into a defensive mode and we don't do much. And if we do, it lasts maybe a few weeks. That's why the sustainability of the effort is so key. So this positive emotional attractor, now you need the negative too, because there are times you have to work on something that is stressful. But the idea is you need more of this positive emotional attractor state. And in coaching in particular, what I say, and all of my colleagues, because we have a coaching research lab at my university that is one of the 3 major centers in the world rather, at a university where there's research and training in coaching, that you really want to keep bringing a person back to this positive emotional attractor state, to their vision, to their sense of purpose. It helps them to refresh, if you will. But the context for coaching should not be the client's presenting problem. All the certification agencies have that wrong. I'm not going to be nice and say, oh, well, if you look at it this way, maybe it's okay. And if there are exigent circumstances, it's relevant. Bull, it's wrong.
Okay.
What they should be
Richard,
doing
let me
is we should be saying to people, let me just finish the thought.
Go.
We should be saying to people, step back from the presenting problem, validate it, because the person's suffering from it. Say, okay, we'll work on that. But first, give me a sense of you, the big picture. Tell me about your dream, your vision. And that's where all of a sudden people stop kind of focused and tensed about their problem, and they can open up and say, and the question really is, if your life were absolutely ideal 10 to 15 years from now, what would it be like?
Right.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. And by the way, folks, in case you think I'm being rude, Richard said to me the other night, I get very excited. He said, you can jump in anytime, interrupt me anytime. He specifically gave me that permission. So
yes, I did. Yes,
don't get annoyed with me if you think I'm jumping on him. I was just going to say, you're absolutely right. The presenting problem in a lot of coaching engagements tends to be where everything starts and sometimes ends. I just wondered, because so many clients come into an environment, with the expectation, I'm going to bring in a problem, I'm going to get it solved, and so many coaches take the attitude that I'm there to solve a problem. How do you, in practice, as a practitioner or as a leader who's leading through coaching, how do you stop people, slow them down, and get them properly oriented?
Well, and part of it is to just point out that the problem they're feeling is a real one, and it will be addressed. And you do have to come back to it. So it's not like you're saying, oh, well, don't worry about that. So what? Your mother just died. You'll get over it. It's absurd. That's like people telling people in the Ukraine today, don't worry. Yeah. Putin will, feel a pang of conscience and withdraw all his troops. And I'm not making light of it. These are very, very sad things. And if a person comes to you with a problem, you do have to say, okay, that is important. We'll get to it. But that's where you want to find a way to help people step back from it. Because I think that if you focus on the problem, you're enabling. Yeah. And during the years I was treating alcoholics clinically, enabling was a key thing, where you did things that enabled a person to either use drugs or keep drinking abusively. Well, I think most therapists and counselors and coaches enable their clients to wallow in the negativity and therefore be closed down. So I think we do have an obligation to them to say, okay, that's important. Before we get there, though, can we step back? Give me the big picture. And that's where the vision or dream. Now, sometimes, I've been doing this around focusing on the vision, not goals, for 30 some years in the practices and training of coaches. But one of the things that I really do emphasize is that if you run into a situation where a person is stymied, they never think about the future, either because they come out of a repressive social political state, they've been living under true oppression, or just because somebody has abused them and robbed them of hope in their upbringing, and they're stymied. Or some people say, well, I don't want to dream about the future I'd love to have because it'll jinx it, which is an absurd concept, as if you've got that degree of power over the future. So what I say to them was, okay, because I want to calm them down. I don't want them to be, as soon as stress comes into play, people close down neurologically. So I say, okay, let's go at it a different way. You just won 80 million euros in the lottery after tax. How does your life or work change? If a person has any financial wherewithal at all, they know if you invested in a whole bunch of mutual funds, you're going to be kicking off 4 to 5 million a year, which is a lot of money. Because sometimes people say, well, I'd pay off my mortgage and my parents' mortgage, and I'd set aside money for my kids. And if you're talking about 80 million euros after tax, that's the first month's income. What do you do with the second month's income? So the question is, and I like the lottery way of doing it, because sometimes people will get to be playful. But in that playfulness, they're going into a part of their brain and their psyche in which they're exposing parts of their dreams, their values. And very often they start to loosen up a bit. And then you could say, okay, I'd like to learn more about that. And if they start to embellish, then you can come back to the dream question. So part of it is getting there. I remember in the mid-90s, a bunch of C-level folks in some of our workshops would say to me, wait, if I ask people about their dreams, suppose their dream isn't to work in my company. They said, what do I do? I said, well, if that's their dream, then they aren't working in your company now. Yeah. And that's a part of it, is that our job, look, COVID has exposed the huge crisis in engagement, motivation that we had before COVID. We knew the numbers, 76% in North America, 83% in Europe, 81% in Japan. People weren't engaged that had full-time jobs. Now we're seeing it because they're leaving the jobs. They're saying, hell, I don't need to do that. And there's so many, in almost all of our countries, there's so many jobs open. People are feeling a burst of efficacy, and they're making choices.
Right.
That's a part of what I think is a result of us not engaging people at this purpose level.
And it's interesting, and the example you used there with the C-suite executive. What if I ask them what they want to do, and it doesn't involve me, or it doesn't involve us? Just so that, because we have a very mixed audience on this show, just so that we make sure that we don't lose everybody who's not a coach. This is not just for coaches. This is you're developing your folks. This is for you to have that same conversation, right?
I would say every manager, every executive, every leader should have coaching as a part of what he or she does in their day-to-day work. You should understand the dreams of your people, of the people who report to you. If you don't, how can you help mentor, coach, or guide them? But when we wrote the last book, we wrote it about helping, not just coaching. So we wrote it for managers and executives and leaders. We wrote it for physicians and nurses. We wrote it for therapists and clerics. We wrote it for parents, thinking about how to motivate or inspire learning and change in their children. So, and we have research studies that have been done, most of which are published, some of which are in the process of being published, about these techniques in every case except the parenting. That's one that we haven't delved into yet. But the whole idea is to focus on the dream. Then, when you did your brief description, you said, well, know what your ideal is, know what your real is, reduce the discrepancy. I actually think that's not where the emphasis is.
Okay.
I mean, what I have said for the better part of the last 30 years in training coaches is, if you only had an hour to coach somebody, which is ridiculous, of course you don't have just an hour, but if you only had an hour, spend 30 minutes on the vision, the dream, spend 20 minutes on their strengths, 5 minutes on their weaknesses, and 5 minutes on the plan. That gives you a feeling for where I think the effort should be. So the way we talk about it is, once you've got a holistic, because that includes every part of your life, your physical, spiritual health, contribution to the community, all this kind of stuff. Once you've got a compelling, comprehensive, holistic dream about your future, 10 to 15 years out, then as you go into assessments, or whether it's 360s, I remember when Ben Palmer was starting Genos and started coming to our consortium meetings, he wanted to work on a 360, and I've been using them since the 70s, so we had a lot of experience and we chatted about it. But whether it's through a 360 or critical incident interviews or other techniques, when a person amasses a whole lot of data about how they're coming across to others, not self-assessment is a little weird, but how they're coming across to others, the next question is, which of your strengths will help you get closer to your vision? Right. So the question that we ask, that we spend more time on, is not what's the discrepancy, it's which of your strengths will help you get there, because that's how you're going to get there.
Sure.
Now, you may have to work on a weakness or two. I've got to say, having done this, I mean, my degree students are average age 44, so I catch people in their 40 midlife crisis or 50 midlife crisis predominantly. And one of the things that I keep running into is that the biggest issue that they're facing in their lives isn't the development of a particular emotional or social intelligence. It's what I call asset allocation. Are they using their capabilities in the right places to fit with their dream of the future? And these days, if you're working in corporate environments, even in governments, people in their 40s and 50s are very often, the biggest issue on their mind is rebalancing their energy, their use of their time and their effort, because all of a sudden they realize, their kids are leaving the house and don't even want to talk to them.
Right.
And their second or third spouse isn't that eager either.
And on that note,
sorry.
let me pull Aoife back in and just see, because I saw on the chat there were a few things ticking up there, because already we're into some of the meat, but we're only into this much of what's covered in the book, folks. So it really is it's a deep and wide research based publication. But Aoife, what are we getting in there for Richard? Questions or comments or thoughts?
Lots as usual, Derek. Thank you. Katerina did share, Richard, that she's very happy to hear you again since her first MOOC in 2013, and greetings from Macedonia.
Great.
And we had
thank you.
A lot of great feedback as well, based on the point you were making. Annie shared that she's actually one of our Genos practitioners, that she's Danish, so she could represent Greenland for you if that gets you closer.
I love it, Annie.
It does. Thank you. Thank you.
And so one of the things that seems a little kind of a constant of the questions that's come in is, could we dive a little deeper into how intentional change theory works? So I'll feed that to you, Derek, for the next question. But we've just had flood of people stating how excited they were. And I noticed when you're looking at the comments on the phone or on the laptop, the way LinkedIn features now is you can have love hearts pop up, or you can have the hands for giving and support. And as soon as you made the comment, you need to understand the dreams of your people, that they just flooded all over the screen.
Love
so
hearts.
I think that was something that really, love hearts and applause and support hands. All these emojis now.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, let me follow on that, Aoife, because one of the points, and Derek, you and I were talking about it yesterday, that one of the points that I think is so crucial is that right now we're talking mostly to helpers. People who are either coaches or trainers or consultants or executives who are worried about facilitating change. One of the mistakes we make when we're in those roles is we are so focused on the other person that we forget to deal with our own excitement and our own degree of stress.
Right. So
one of the issues that I think is important is you can't inspire others unless you feel inspired. So I believe that people especially in any of the managerial or helping professions, including physicians and nurses, need to spend time tending to their renewal, their dream. And I never saw this more poignantly than early in the COVID crisis. I was ridiculously vacuuming, washing some of our rugs, and I fell down the basement stairs, bringing the device back down. And fortunately, I didn't hit my head, but I injured my arm and my elbow. And a couple months later, my primary care physician said, okay, I want you to go to this specialist. I went to him. He said, okay, I've seen this before. Unless you're a professional athlete, I don't want to do surgery, because I think if we immobilize it, put a splint on and then work slowly into exercises, you'll have a much more long-lasting recovery, which was exactly true. He sent me to his physical therapist. So while she's molding this splint to my arm and starting to go over the various steps of what I'll do each week over the next 6 weeks, I asked her something about, because this was happening in July of 2020. I asked her how the past few months had gone, because I knew everybody I'm at Mass General Hospital in Boston. That's where all my doctors are. And I knew everybody was in crisis mode because of COVID. And that was at the horrendous, we thought was the peak of the crisis. And she said, well, I was deployed to Boston Hope for 6 weeks. And Boston Hope was the convention center in Boston where all the big conferences are held that can house, 50,000 people. They converted it to an emergency hospital, 500 beds for people that looked terminal due to COVID, and 500 beds for people that were in respiratory and crisis. And when she used the word deployed, it's a funny word to use, it's kind of military. And I said, well, tell me more about that. Well, she started to talk about it. I was so moved by how she handled herself that I called her a week later and I asked her if I could interview her to use her story, which she did give me permission. As soon as she started, she knew she was running 12-hour shifts. Yeah. And these 12 hours were with a lot of indigents and folks who were homeless who had contracted COVID, as well as people who were really suffering. And at that point in the crisis, we didn't have the antivirals. We didn't have some of the other techniques, and we were still kind of chasing our tails. So it was very sad work. And I said, how did you make it through all this? She said, well, I instinctively realized that my sense of spirit had to be fed more than just sleep. She said, so I made sure that every morning I ran my usual run. But, you know, sometimes I'd run several times a week. I was running every day, several miles along the Charles River. And she said, then by the time we got into the second week, I called friends of mine and we had Zoom dinners. You know, so we didn't, because we were all tired. We were all feeling alone and scared. And she said, and I would call and talk to my parents every other day. And I tried to do it on Zoom so we could see each other. And then we talked about some of the other things she was doing, where she would go in and out of self-maintenance things like some meditation as well as the running, and then social with friends, family. And she was able to manage her balance so that at the end of her 6 weeks, when they said, okay, you can return to your normal duties at the hospital, she wasn't depleted. And she had managed herself through that. She knew that she couldn't give to the patients unless she was feeling it, you know, and feeling excited. So that's a part of the spirit and why I spend so much of my time, as does Ellen and Melvin, talking to coaches and physicians. I'm on the board of a few hospitals, and I work with our school of nursing and a lot of the really big hospital, MD Anderson. I do talks at MGH, Cleveland Clinic, etc. Is because I think the physicians and nurses need a lot of this self renewal, if you will, because when you're helping people, it's inherently stressful. It's what Dave McClellan used to call power stress, and it adds on top of the other stresses. So I don't know if it seemed like a good example for what you were talking about. Anyway.
Yeah,
100%. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. In fact, even though this is a little bit of a kind of diversion, just because you were talking about that renewal, it feels like a good place to mention something I was going to mention later on that we're going to put in the resources, and that's the personal sustainability index, because it sounds that really speaks to that. And folks just, well, no, I was going to tell you what it is. I'm going to let Richard tell you what it is, and we're going to send you a link to it, because I think it's a really important tool for managing your renewal and your sustainability.
Melvin Smith and I, one of the co-authors in the book, and my colleague at school, we started calling out this issue in an article we started writing in 2003 that actually finally came out in an academic journal in 2006. But we used a lot of the concept in our 2005 book, that if you lead others and see coaching as a part of your role, and you don't coach like your image of a sports coach, but you actually coach to their dreams, to their desires, which we started calling coaching with compassion, because it's coaching focused on the other.
Sure.
Kind of a Confucian interpretation. The typical way we do it is we coach to our dreams for the other person, what we want them to be. And we call that coaching for compliance. I want you to comply with my images of what you should do. And the other person, however well intended, the other person experiences it as a coaching bully.
Yeah.
When we started focusing on that, I remember going back and forth between these two sets of experiences, stress experiences, which medical research and psychological research has studied the hell out of, and the alternative. The alternative, if one is the sympathetic nervous system, the other is the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's amazing how all of these people who study stress talk about the sympathetic nervous system and then devote a few words to the parasympathetic and forget about it.
Yeah.
When in fact, it's very clear today that the only antidote to stress is parasympathetic activation, which for shorthand I call renewal.
Yeah.
Now this has huge implications, because a lot of people try to help others by lowering their stress. It's not really going to help. what it does is it just makes it more mild, but it's still annoying and it still has all these horrible effects. So it's much smarter to enhance the number of renewal experiences. Dan Goldman and I had an opportunity from a CEO of I don't want to say who, but a very famous CEO, very well-known entrepreneur, about 8 years ago, I'd given a speech for him. Dan was doing another speech for him, and he approached Dan and said, I'm really concerned about my folks. I'd like to have them know more about a few dimensions. One of them was I helped to reinterpret it as this renewal versus stress. So Dan and I developed a test. And we sought out to develop a test that helped a normal person. So I'm not talking about somebody who's, has cancer or somebody who's just gotten divorced, but people that are within the realm of typical, that's what I mean by normal, typical experiences, to say, last week, what are the variety of stress-related incidents that you might have had, and what are the variety of renewal? So that's what we did. We developed a test, ran a number of studies. It worked so well, we said, hell, this is serious. I then reapplied at my university for the IRB, the ethics approval, and we did a whole set of new studies under that guidance. And the paper came out last year, a year ago, last March, on the Personal Sustainability Index. So what we're asking is that you look at last week. So we're not looking at exceptional moments, we're looking at more typical. And it asks you, like in stress, did somebody cut you off in traffic? Did your cell phone drop a call during a call that was important to you? Those are the kinds of things that usually elevate all this bad stuff in your system. And on the parasympathetic, it's, did you meditate for at least 15 minutes at any time in the week? Did you do yoga? Did you pray? There, you have to say, pray to a loving God, because if people pray to a vengeful God, it goes the other way. Yeah. But did you exercise modestly? Did you feel hopeful about the future? Did you have a loving moment with a partner or spouse? Did you have a playful conversation with your children or friends? Did you have a meal that was fun and filled with laughter? So what we've done is try to characterize this and the power of the test in research. So when we published the test in March, we published the test as an appendix. So I wanted anybody that wants to do research with this to use it for free. And then Dan's son came up with a nice online way for people to use the test. But what we were able to show is, as we suspected, if your number of moments or experiences of renewal exceed your number of stress moments last week, you are more likely to feel more engaged in your work, more sense of well-being, more satisfaction with the progress of your life. You're feeling more empathic toward others. You're more resilient. You have less depressing thoughts, less anxiety, etc. And then we did something which I've been talking about since I was doing psychotherapy with alcoholics and drug addicts in the 70s. I kept telling them, don't just exchange one bad habit for another. So if all of us, I remember in the 70s, in those days it wasn't as popular to go to a health club, but some of my patients in the hospitals would stop drinking and then they'd exercise for 6 hours a day. Well, excuse me, it's not just my body that tells you I don't believe in that, but I think if anybody exercises for 6 hours a day, it either means they have a really good trust fund or they're kind of a little obsessive compulsive. Yeah. And what we were able to show was not only is the amount of these experiences key, but that the variety of them is just as powerful in predicting all these good things, the variety. So over a week, doing a variety of things, not always meditating, but doing some of these things, some of which are individual, some of which are social. And the key to the stress and renewal is the stress is all around us and we need it. It's functional. You need it to wake up, you need it to make a decision, you need it to focus to solve a problem. But the question is, what about counterbalancing your system? So our recommendation coming out of this research is focus on more frequent shorter, briefer doses of renewal. Don't go for the whole hour. Go for a number of 15-minute moments. When you take a coffee break, don't sit and play violent video games. Go and talk to a friend, over coffee or tea or something.
Yeah, and what I liked about the way when I completed it myself, what I really liked was it becomes really obvious at the end of it, because it's a very simple mechanism, but at the end it becomes really obvious, where can I increase the doses of each of these renewal things. So there's nothing mystical, there's no hidden moving parts. You look at this and you say, shoot, it's so freaking obvious. I mean, the stress is going to be always there, but here are the areas where, as you say, I can up the dose a little bit. And really pointed you in the right direction. Now, I'm conscious of the time, folks. We're going to give a link to the personal sustainability index so that you can complete it yourself. And I recommend it in the context of what Richard was saying of kind of renewing yourself as a leader, as a coach, as a person who's guiding and supporting people. It's an absolute essential as a parent, for God's sakes. But just coming back, because folks were talking about it in the chat there, Richard, we kind of touched on, and we could probably spend a whole session talking about the ideal self. And you spoke about leveraging those strengths in the second one, where you're leveraging the strengths in the existing self. Can you take us through the rest of that ICT?
The whole thing, okay?
Yeah,
sure.
And by the way, folks, buy the book if you want to go really deep. So, sorry, Richard.
No, it's okay. And by the way, this is a fractal theory. So the same thing would apply if you're working on your couple relationship, on your family or team relationships, on your organization, your community, country relationships. The first discovery has to be some comprehensive, compelling dream. If it's a group of people, it's a shared vision.
Yeah.
And that's not what somebody tells them. It has to come from dialogue, from people talking about it, feeling it. If you have that, you're eligible for the second discovery. By eligible, I mean it will likely happen. If you don't have that, which happens a lot, there's a 5% chance you'll move ahead on a change or learning process. That's why the effectiveness of most management, leadership training, and education is so abysmal. The second discovery is, how do I come across to others? And if you will, if a personal vision statement is the output of the first, the output of the second is a personal balance sheet. And once you know your strengths, and collectively it's what are we doing together in terms of our norms or our culture that are strengths, what might be some of the weaknesses. Then you go to the learning plan, which is the third discovery. So the question in the learning plan is, how do I move closer to my vision using my strengths and maybe working on one weakness? But the focus is getting closer to the vision using strengths, maybe working on one weakness. And a test of it is, are you excited about working on it? Because as soon as you think it's I should work on it, it's, like going to the health club for a lot of us who are volume challenged. It's just not motivating. And, the shoulds are the ought self, and those are the ones that are not sustainable. But if you're excited about it, if you're so excited about trying this thing or working on it that other things in life seem like a distraction, then you're on the right track. The fourth discovery is when you actually experiment with the new thoughts, feelings, behavior, and then after a certain number of trials, you start to practice it. And you want to practice it to the point of mastery, not just practice it to the point of comfort. And then you're building the fifth discovery, which are these resonant, caring relationships that help you through the whole thing, because you can't do it alone. And whether that one of those relationships is with a coach, that's great. But I think it also has to be with a whole lot more people. And it's one of the reasons why right now I started a study group in our coaching research lab last January, a year ago January, on peer coaching in groups, because I think that's the real future,
right,
where you can reach not the top 300 people in an organization, but the next 50,000 people, by giving people a certain amount of training in how to work in these study groups, peer coaching groups, employee resource groups, whatever we want to call them, affinity groups. But we need more than just one relationship there. And then the whole thing cycles again. It's an iterative cycle, so you keep going.
And what's nice is I know it's not linear, but it has that appeal of having those kind of steps where you get a sense of where am I in that process, and you might be bouncing back and forth and looping around, but it's right. As a coach, as a manager, as a leader, it's much easier to identify where am I and where do I need to move from here.
Yeah, and you need more PEA than NEA at any moment to move from one to the other.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter where I am in a process if I'm coaching someone. I did yesterday with a colleague that I'm coaching from in one of the, I don't want to say which, but one of the African countries that it was our 5th or 6th session. So I opened by saying, okay, in the last 3 weeks, have you made any changes or clarifications to your vision? I don't do that because I actually thought the person has changed their vision.
Yeah.
I do it because I want them to remember the vision, and then
back.
we go on to the next step. Yeah. So even though there is a sequence in the cyclical nature of intentional change theory, what you're always doing is using the other parts to make sure that you keep visiting the PEA, because let's face it, learning and change is stressful, and it's an NEA activity. So you need a bit more. This is more than just vaccines. These are daily booster shots. If I stay in the current parlance.
Let me give you something that's near impossible, because and again, folks, seriously, buy the book, because there's a lot going in there. Richard is talking there about NEA and PEA, positive emotional attractors and negative emotional attractors. And I do want to talk about your coaching competency study before we finish, and I don't want to run late.
Oh, right.
Is it possible in about 3 minutes just to really quickly, in the context of what we're talking about, just give people a sense? Now, it's broken down in the book, folks, of what is a positive emotional attractor, what's a negative emotional attractor in the context of what we're talking about.
A positive emotional attractor is a physiological and psychological state. It's being in the parasympathetic hormonal state, which is this renewal part, secreting things like oxytocin, vasopressin, etc. It's being more in the neural network called Tony Jack calls it the empathic network. It's the default mode network technically. And just thinking about things with positive adjectives. The negative emotional attractor is being in the stress state, the sympathetic nervous system, being in the dominant analytic mode, using Tony's label, but it's really the task positive network in the brain, and looking at things critically. And my point is, these operate like magnets. They bring you around them, not into them. And we need both. I mean, I call one surviving and the other thriving. Some people call the thriving flourishing, but we have to survive, otherwise there is no possibility to thrive.
Sure.
But if you live your life focused on survival, it's kind of empty. It's kind of hollow. And it's the movement back and forth. And that's the thing that is so key, because each of these systems, these neural networks, suppress each other. The analytic and the empathic suppress each other. So if you focus on financials and specific goals, you're suppressing openness to new ideas and people, and vice versa. The same thing with the sympathetic, parasympathetic. Same thing with positive, negative. It's why so many people make the mistake of thinking that giving constructive feedback is helpful to the other person. When people say to me, well, what do I do if I have feedback for somebody? My quick answer is keep it to yourself. Because if you tell the other person, they're not going to change anyway. So what are you doing? Making yourself feel better?
Yeah.
And now, people do occasionally want feedback.
Sure.
And if you give somebody constructive feedback or even critical feedback, when they have genuinely asked for it, it helps them on their change process. But most of the time, it's not. Especially people sitting with their boss at the end of a performance review, and the boss says, okay, let's talk about what you're going to do differently next year. Let's talk about your performance improvement plan. And the person is sitting there nodding their head like you are with me, Derek, except they have their fingers in their ears. They're saying, yes, that's so important. I'm so glad you're telling me that, because they're not going to do it. So the question is, how do you help people? How do you get people to the point where they are genuinely open to and receptive? We talk about that in the book. A lot of it has to do with listening at many levels. And one of the chapters, Ellen was building off of something she does in her workshops called asking powerful questions, which is just learning to ask questions that help a person sort things out. Now, a lot of coaches do this.
Yeah.
The problem that we have, if I back up to the competency model, is a lot of training programs, all training programs for coaches, and all of the certification agencies have competency models. The challenge is that none of those competency models are based on any empirical evidence. They do surveys of current coaches. Yeah. I showed in my 1982 book, when you survey experts, half of the things they say, in fact, when you do it against performance, work out. But 25% of the things they say are irrelevant. And what's worse is 25% of the things they identify as necessary are the opposite to what works. So I would contend that we really desperately need more of this kind of research against the ultimate, which is client change or affirmation of their path, their vision, their behavior, their relationships. And so I launched 3 years ago one major study, and I started about a year and a half ago another study in which we're trying to collect data from coaches about their competencies and some other things that we need to have to cross-check that. And then we're asking them, so we ask the coaches for about 35 minutes, fill out some stuff, give us 5 to 8 names of people who can fill out this 360 on you, not just on your coaching, but on your behavior typically. And then when you start a new coaching relationship with a client, ask the client if they're willing to help out the field with some research. And if they are, we want 20 minutes of their time to fill out a couple surveys, and then we'll come back to them a year later. It's hard. I mean, I've approached over 20,000 coaches, and I think we have maybe 500 that have started the thing, and 70 that have actually gotten it far enough along, and we need a few hundred more. So I'm still appealing for it. It's not the end all be all, but I believe that in a field that is so popular and does so much good work like coaching, we need to bolster our intellectual foundation. That's our integrity. Yeah. And I think right now, as you know, the field of consulting is rife with fads and, snake oil. And what separates us is the fact that a lot of consultants work in tandem, either themselves or with other colleagues, around doing research to say what really works and why and how does it work. So you're
great. Well, and folks, we're going to send you a link. You could be one of those folks who actually make it all the way to the end and contribute to what is already a 55-year trajectory of research into your profession and improving the profession. So, in a moment,
let me just say, I beg people to participate, because we want to help the field move forward, and this is going to be a vital piece. Anyway.
Well, folks, we'll put those resources up there now in a moment. Richard has been really generous with his time. And it's like when myself and Aoife sat down and we started to plan this out, we said, there's no freaking way it's going to be comfortable in an hour, but it could go for 10 hours. But seriously, and I mean this most sincerely, do buy the book. It's deep and it's broad, and it connects all of these dots together in a beautiful way with the research on the neuroscience side of things and on the field research. So really superb. Richard,
I'm sorry, Derek and Aoife, I thought this was just episode 1. We're not doing episode 2.
Okay,
we would love to have you.
Okay, Sucker, we're getting you back for episode 2. You just made a commitment online. We got
That's
you.
A promise.
We got you.
That's a promise.
Good. I appreciate that. Thank you, Richard. Thank you so much. Really, really fantastic interview, fantastic session. Folks, we are right on time now. What I'm going to do now, without any further ado, is I'm just going to go straight to the page, and I'm going to leave it up there for a minute or two, that has the link through to Richard's resource page. So you'll find a link to the book, a link to the competency study, a link to sustainability index, and we'll put something up connecting to the MOOCs as well. So again, Richard, thank you very, very much, and we look forward to having you back for episode 2.
If only you could see the amount of applause emojis going across the screen right now. We really, I will try to send you a screenshot later on. Thank you so much.
We'll make sure we get you a copy of it, Richard. Thank you so much. And thank you, folks, for joining us, putting that resource page up for you right now. Take care. We leave it there for 2 minutes. Bye-bye.